Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, ich begrüße Sie herzlich an diesem Mittag, dem Tag nach den Bundestagswahlen in Deutschland, hier aus der hessischen Landesvertretung in Brüssel. Deutschland hat gewählt, das ist heute unser Thema. Mein Name ist Thomas Meyer.
Today I'm Thomas Meyer, correspondent, EU correspondent of Der Standard in Brussels. I am head of office there, and I will be moderating today's event, in which you will also be able to put in questions. What happened and what will come? What will the future bring? What does this election result mean for the common Europe? This is the question that we want to investigate today. Not only Germany is wondering about this, but of course you are too, and all members of the European Union are wondering what is going to happen now, especially following Angela Merkel's departure, who has contributed to happenings in the European Union for the past 16 years. You know what happened? We had a true groundbreaking result. The party landscape in Germany will never be again what it was in the past. That is one thing. And on the other side, we could say maybe it's also a sort of normalization, as we had seen in other countries. The big parties, the big popular parties, are not the biggest anymore, the ones to decide. We're going to look into such questions. And first of all, I would like to hand over to the Secretary of State for European Affairs of the state of Hessen, Mr. Weinmeister, for some introductory remarks. You have the floor, Mr. Weinmeister, please.
Ja, ganz herzlich.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome to you for this event in the series Europe After the Elections, a series that we have followed, that we have had for quite some time now. Of course, as you all know, we had federal elections, and Mr. Meyer already mentioned that much has changed following these elections. We can see, or we are wondering, what will happen? What will future constellations be? Will there be a cooperation between SPD, the Greens, and FDP? Will there be a coalition between CDU, CSU, Greens, and others? We are going to see that in the coming days. One thing is certain: the party system and the way the parties are setting up in the Bundestag, we can see that we're actually closer now to the European standard than before, as far as the distribution of votes is concerned, where there's sort of redistribution, and the two-party coalition system that we had in the past, well, that will be changing. We're going to see rather three parties working together as a coalition in order to be able to form a functioning government. I wish Germany to be able to conduct successful negotiations, to successful coalition talks in order to work together closely. And I'm looking forward to Mr. Koch's analysis today. I would also like to thank Mr. Meyer for taking over moderation today. And as far as Mr. Koch is concerned, he is Brussels' head of office of the Handelsblatt, so he has also a very in-depth knowledge about Germany. And I wish you now a wonderful event. Stay safe, and I'm looking forward to seeing you live in Brussels again. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinmeister. I would now like to hand over to Mr. Moritz Koch. He's my colleague from the Handelsblatt here in Brussels, and we could not have found anyone better to present the election results in its significance for the European Union. He has been here from ever since March 2021 as chief of office of the Handelsblatt, 4 years. So the 4 years before, he lived in Berlin, so he knows Berlin from the inside. And he also has a global view, because before being in Berlin, he was correspondent for the United States for the Handelsblatt in Washington. Mr. Koch, we're looking forward to having your analysis from this election result, from a true groundbreaking election. Thank you very much, both Mr. Meyer and you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a historical election that we had this week, and I'm sure that you must have certain questions, quite an amount of questions, on what will happen in Germany now, how the government may be formed. The result yesterday was sort of paradox, because on the one hand, quite clear, but on the other hand, there was no decisive decision, no final decision, because the SPD, the Social Democrats, won the elections, but CDU with Armin Laschet also have formulated a request for mandate as a chancellor. I will present the election results to you in the following minutes, and then we're going to be able to hold a discussion to look into your questions. Here you have the election results. Now they are official. This is the final result as of today. There are dramatical losses for CDU-CSU, which also was the coalition representing or to whom belonged the former Chancellor Angela Merkel. SPD has come back on the floor with quite a great result, but they too have not come back to the level they had with Gerhard Schröder, where they had over 40% of votes in the past. And we have a strengthening of the smaller parties. Mr. Meyer already mentioned it, so we see that there's sort of fractioning of the party system, as we have observed it in other countries of the European Union thus far. Merkel, who had 16 years of chancellorship, is thus coming to an end, and this leads also to an end of the big popular parties, at least for what we can see today, and a strengthening of smaller parties, the junior parties, as we could call them. But, and this is very important, and it's part of what makes the situation so complex, there's no strengthening of the borders, but rather strengthening of the center. The political center has won votes, and not the radical parties such as AfD or Die Linke, the left party. The Greens, well, they are not so small anymore, but they are not the big league either. They had actually proposed Annalena Baerbock for chancellorship. She has not been able to reach this objective. However, they have still come to the best election results so far in the history. And they will probably be, or they will be playing an important role in any coalition option. FDP also gained votes. They already had a very respectable level before, and this is more stable than ever, and probably they will have their say in the new government. AfD, however, lost votes, and Die Linke as well. AfD was the strongest opposition party, and they are now the second weakest. Why did they lose votes? Because in topics such as foreigners, integration, etc., they were not putting a focus on what was really important in this election campaign. And also their opposition in the corona policies did not convince voters. Most Germans in these past years have actually rather favored the idea of the central government, of the government party, and they were not against lockdowns. The left party Die Linke, the radical left party Die Linke, has also lost a lot of votes. Here we can see that voters actually went over to other parties. It was a former Eastern Germany protest party, and they lost the status to AfD. And why are they still present? Well, because they have 3 direct mandates, and this is the only reason why they are still there, because they have been able to pass over the 5% threshold that is valid for all parties. Thus, for the results, yesterday's results, here you can see the way the new parliament will be formed, the way the seats will be distributed. SPD will have the biggest share of seats. CDU and CSU are following heel. When you don't know much about German policies, well, then we will have to say that CDU and CSU are actually 2 different parties. The first is, so to say, the Bavarian wing of Christian Democrats, but they are a separate party, and both together are a common big party in the Bundestag. And together they will actually manage to be the 2nd biggest party. Then on the 3rd place we have the Greens, followed by FDP, AfD, which will from now on only be the 3rd biggest party amongst the small parties, and then the left, Die Linke, the radical left. Now the question is, what will happen? What are they going to do, these parties? Because there is no fixed structure. It is not, in Germany, it is not automatically that the biggest party, the party with the biggest share, will have the chancellorship. There is also no pre-organized majority, but the chancellor actually will have to look for his majority within the parliament in Germany. And this means something very interesting, because FDP and Greens, in the night of the elections itself, stated that they also want to conduct negotiations and want to see if they can bridge the gap. And the Greens, who have a very strong ecological component and also have regulative requests, well, their ideologies could not be any further than this, but they both realized that now they have to work together if they want to have a say. So both parties are actually going to be kingmakers. That is going what they try to do. So either they would be making Scholz or Armin Laschet the new chancellor. Angela Merkel herself, a former chancellor, is leaving office after 16 years. And what she's leaving behind is a party who has suffered losses and who was not really prepared for the day after the elections. You can already see that the situation is not clear and that there are certain competition. There's a certain competition within the political landscape now. Armin Laschet, of course, for him that's quite hard, because yesterday he said that he wanted to be chancellor and he wanted to be chancellor of a modernizing coalition, but it remains unclear how he would be managing to do this. He does not have the support of the population, neither does he have a clear position in his own ranks. Eastern German minister presidents already mentioned that they don't think that he would be the favored chancellor for voters, and that CDU, CSU would not be the party proposing a chancellor. And they doubt that he will be the man in charge. Markus Söder, He is party leader of CSU, and he would love to be replacing Armin Laschet, but internally he lost competition against him. However, he never digested that, and he was also not always very constructive for Christian Democrats within this election campaign. He will face questions whether he is a team player, and his position as well is neither clear nor strong. Olaf Scholz from SPD had an amazing result for the for the Social Democrats. Recent polls saw him on 11 to 13% only. So, as SPD suggested, wanting to nominate a chancellor candidate, this seemed totally unrealistic. And it is especially thanks to Scholz if SPD was able to hold such a support in the end. The SPD rather presented itself in this election campaign as a Scholz party, and he is the strong man. He's the strong man, the leading figure in SPD. Quite recently, 2 years ago, he actually lost party leadership against these two persons, Saskia Esken and Norbert Walter Borjans. They both were more left than him, and Olaf Scholz was just received the status of an administrator, and now they have to find a new role behind him. And it will be interesting to see what will happen to SPD over the next years, whether the left wing is going to actually try to compete with Olaf Scholz or whether they will cooperate. And then we have Annalena Baerbock. She's one of the biggest losers. She also was a candidate for chancellorship, but she did not reach this at all. She will now have to try to find the best possible position within government. But there's also Robert Habeck. Of course, they both like to show off that everything is harmonious, but after the elections and internal negotiations, you actually could see that there's quite some tension and competition, and Robert Habeck definitely thought to be the better candidate. So now we're going to see whether he's going to take the lead in the Greens and make best use of Annalena Baerbock's weakness at this point in time. And then we have Christian Lindner. He's one of the kingmakers of the Free Democrats, the Liberal Party of Germany. However, he's also under pressure. He cannot simply freely decide who is going to be chancellor. Last time, there was already the negotiations in the Jamaica coalition where he actually was the one to make the negotiations not go as foreseen. So this time he really has to prove himself. And this means that he has to leave his ideological comfort zone in order to be able, as we expect, to have a red, yellow, green coalition, as we foresee. AfD, Alternative for Germany, it wasn't really seen in the election campaign. After the election, they said they were treated in an unfair manner by other parties and by the media. They felt mobbed, and it's quite interesting that a party who is so aggressive against their competitors and who has had such a strong rhetoric is now actually complaining to have been mobbed. Interesting to say is that in the eastern part of Germany, they are quite a very strong, almost popular party. They are strongest party in Thüringen and Saxony. They also had big gains. It is too soon now to say that they will not have an impact at all. They will continue to be a relevant party in the Bundestag. And then the left, Die Linke, their result is almost half of before. And they will only be in the Bundestag because they have 3 direct mandates. And this makes them go around the 3% threshold. The question is now, will they going to be modernizing themselves? Will they modernize themselves, or will they actually continue with their ideological vision? But they definitely have lost in this election. And this is the end of the presentation of the German party landscape. The questions that we're going to see in detail are, well, what is going to happen now? There will be a government there will have to be a government to be formed. Europe is waiting. Europe cannot wait that Germany endeavors months and months of competition and negotiations, so there will be quite some pressure on Berlin. The parties know that. And this is also why it was clear that FDP and the Greens decided to start negotiations even in the nights of the election themselves. Thank you very much, Mr. Koch, for this excellent overview and the details concerning the election results and what that means for the single parties. Now we would like to discuss in detail, as you said, what will happen. And then we would also like to look into the European level, what this actually means for the European partners, for policies here. And I would like to sum it up saying that apparently, and that's a quite significant difference to other parties, that radical parties from the left and the right did not play a role and are not going to play a role in the future coalition. I think that's quite interesting. And secondly, what I already said, the big popular parties who are making government so far, they cannot just continue to do so in the future. SPD did win, of course, but neither SPD nor CDU-CSU actually have an absolute majority. In European comparison, their results were not a surprise, but for Germany, it is a surprise. It's a bit like in Austria, if I may say so, because we also had big coalitions there, but as soon as the big coalitions ended, there were other more center-oriented parties who came up. And I think it's the same what is happening here. And my first question to you would be, we don't have an impression that Scholz or Laschet are the ones trying to make government, to create government, but it's rather the Greens and the Liberal, and they did even repeat it this morning, that they are the ones who are discussing future coalitions. What does this mean? Does it mean that the smaller parties, the small center parties, who are going to be kingmakers, or what is happening? Yeah, we could say it in this way, because they also now have to become clear about their own differences and try to bridge the gap between them. But we could say that there is a big coalition of small parties in the future. Big coalition because both parties are ideologically quite different, but they have grown quite strong. And both parties now have to see if they find a sufficient common denominator to lead negotiations and then choose their candidates, their partner. Now, of course, choosing a partner is not just happening just like that, in empty space. Of course, Olaf Scholz is the election winner and Armin Laschet is the loser of this election. So this will play a role, and the Greens have a big problem, or would have a big problem, if they were trying to form a Jamaica coalition, because many would not favor this. Okay, let's come back to this later. So Greens and FDP, ideologically speaking, there are huge differences. This is why it's so strange that these two parties said we're going to start a process. In many countries, such as here in Belgium, you have a king. In other countries, you have a president. In most countries, after an election, a head of state gives the mandate to someone to form a government. In Germany, it's different. In Germany, so far, it was clear. You had a winner, an election winner, and he created government. But this time, it's different. How does this function? Could you please tell us what's happening in Berlin right now? Indeed, the chancellor is the person having majority in the Bundestag, but there is no clear definition of how majority is going to be formed. So we're not all waiting just for Olaf Scholz to declare who are his partners, but the partners are quite self-confident, saying, it's us who are going to take the lead. We're going to see what we want to do in a government, and then we will talk to Scholz. So there's a possibility for the Greens and for FDP to create a Jamaica coalition with Laschet. And this is actually something they can use against SPD, and both parties are making good use of it to have the strongest possible negotiation position. And Olaf Scholz, on the other hand, can also make his own claim on the side of the union, because it will also be possible to have a big coalition, and FDP and Greens also have to take care not to be too active in a sense, because SPD might also investigate other possibilities, other options, such as Olaf Scholz. When you say big coalition, this is theoretically a possibility, but to make it easier for our listeners, let's say, what do you think is more probable? I think what is clear is that Baerbock will not be a chancellor candidate, so she's not going to be the future chancellor, even though, if I understand you correctly, it could be possible. It could be that the three parties declare that she should be a chancellor. So if there is no clear obligation, it could actually be. Well, it wouldn't be illegal, definitely, but politically it's not imaginable. So either Olaf Scholz or Armin Laschet will be the chancellor. Yes, or another politician from the union. That could be also, but I think most probably Olaf Scholz will be the future chancellor. That is the most probable of all the options. And the union will probably lead negotiations with itself. Armin Laschet has not succeeded in having the entire party behind himself. So, right, his party had a really terrible result, and already the election campaign had been a disaster. So we really do not see population behind him. So there are political realities, and this also needs to be taken on board when you look at the future possibility. So you think that the traffic light coalition is the most probable one, right? How long will it take until this will be clear? If I understand correctly, still a few minutes ago, there was a lot happening. We saw this morning there was an SPD candidate, so Olaf Scholz, was really calm, and as I would say, he looked serene, and he reminded us that SPD has always had successful coalitions in the past. Think of William Brandt. And I think he mentioned it in a very logical way. It sounded really harmonious. And Armin Laschet, on the other hand, yesterday said he thinks he has the same possibilities. And today we hear rather that he's quite under pressure. Is this still the case? Well, the union has realized that the population is not giving it the mandate, so to say. And this means that internally, critics to Laschet will come to the forefront and dare to criticize him and say that he did not take a good lead of this election campaign and that the party may now take the opportunity to renew itself, to modernize itself as an opposition party, and also maybe change some of its head personnel, leading personnel. So that's still ongoing. It's difficult to foresee what will happen within this party. As we already said, in the end, it all depends on how quickly FDP and Greens will bridge their gaps. If they realize, well, we just cannot work together, we are too far ideologically speaking, and the Greens will just want to block everything, and on the other hand, the Liberals do not want to support climate, then this coalition will not be able to take place. And then Scholz, who is now supporting that he wants to be the successor of Helmut Schmidt and who is a social democrat of the center, then he would not be able to overcome such differences. But the signs, both on the side of the Greens and the FDP, point into a direction where we say it's quite interesting, and we see that they could actually overcome their differences. On the contrary, they could actually be bringing together ecological and economical. It's quite charming also to imagine this.
To make a point, you say it might be quicker, and you can see who can decide upon the decision, and it will be Scholz with the Greens and with FDP, or another CDU candidate who will have this charge. Will it be this week? Will it be next week? How quick can that be? In 2 months, we already 2.5 months, we are already Christmas. Well, it's difficult to say. Last time it took very long because we had the jump between FDP and the union, and after 2 months they were still together talking about it. Anyhow, it lasted months, and at the end we have seen that it will not work because the FDP bailed out, and everybody wants to avoid this, and I guess that the chances are high that before Christmas we will find an agreement. This depends on many factors, and therefore it is so unsure. If the Greens and the FDP are not coming together and the SPD will have a majority with the union, because then it will be very difficult, because then we will have fights and will probably not be able to continue with the big coalition, with the great coalition. As far as the CDU is concerned, Laschet or somebody else, can we think it might be somebody completely different? Because we do not have any name. I don't think this is really, well, some people talk about Markus Söder, but I do not think that this is realistic. And probably we can't explain it. It's the only power that had lost, the only party. The Green have 5% more. We should not forget, if we have these three parties, they have more or less 12%. Yes, all three parties of the traffic light won. Now, and this is interesting, we go back to the European topic, this is the question of the FDP, and I will say what we read as the next financial minister of this government. Whoever will be chancellor will not have this resort, but it will be one of the coalition parties. And we have Mr. Lindner, who is very strong, who has a clear position. He is one of the candidates. Now, how can this be working, and this would be also influence the whole taxation question? Maybe you can tell us something about this, and then I will ask you about the Greens. Now, indeed, this is one of the big topics which might be a problem in the next discussions for the coalition. And the question, how can we go ahead with the monetary union, because the FDP has another idea than SPD and the Greens. SPD and Greens like Next Generation EU with the big recovery fund, and they are also thinking about having such an instrument for much longer. And the Stability Pact for the Eurozone should be reformed in their eyes. It should be something more sustainable in the ecological sense, for green investments. All this is very important. That can be found in the election programs. The FDP does not like it, and they want a liberal approach. Now the question is how strong they will insist on this request, or will they say we would prefer to have internal changes. Mr. Lindner could then work on the taxation questions, also as far as companies are concerned, and the European lines would be left to Mr. Scholz. But this is one of the very important questions here. You mean many questions that are discussed in Germany might be tackled on a European level. And I would like to add, at the European level, it's not the finance minister that is the most important person, but in the European Council, where we have the decisions, there we have the chancellor, and he can decide, he can say how things should be done, what compromise they can search in whatever kind of taxation, like digital taxation. There will be a lot of changes, and it will be the chancellor then. But Mr. Lindner should accept that, and the question is, will he do that? Because he will know that the important decisions would not be his, but those of Mr. Scholz, and I don't know if he would accept that. But from the other side, we do have an interesting questions from the people that are following us. You can ask via the internet or via the phone, and please show the necessary dates and links once again. Now, the questions is from Tim Roth, and he wants to know if a minority government with the Greens and FDP, something that we might imagine. But it's not very realistic, because FDP and the Greens, or the Union, do have the wish to enter and to go in their directions. It would have been more realistic to have the backup of the left. This is not possible now, but it might have been an option, because in the left party we have many people who do not want to govern, and this weakens Mr. Scholz, because he can't say that he would green-red government, and if he has a minority government, he should talk to the FDP, because votes from the FDP should then come in order to make him a chancellor. And this would obviously, there we would need a further dialogue in order to realize all this. Now I come back what the difficulties for the FDP are: Lindner, the financial policy, and the taxation. Where are the red lines for the Greens? What is difficult for them to accept? I would like to keep it in this context. If we have 4 parties in the government, but then Mr. Lindner, like Laschet, would have an easier play. Now, what would the Greens do? We do it with the SPD. But then we can have a Jamaica coalition with our topics. This is very interesting. The Greens in Jamaica would be very, very strong. CDU and the Union already said that they have interest, or Laschet has the interest to be chancellor. He didn't talk about the context, and the Greens might go ahead with their requests. They would be in a very strong position. It would be even stronger than with the traffic light. We have this in Schleswig-Holstein, strong position, and the most important question is that they do not accept Laschet in the population. The citizens do not accept him, and probably also the basis would discuss this. But if we think about the program of the European Union, an eco-social market program, would the CDU say, okay, we leave Mr. Habeck in the financial ministry and the finance ministry, and would FDP then come in? Well, indeed, the position of the Greens is very strong, and I guess that the Greens would ask for the finance, Ministry of Finance. And in the traffic light coalition, it is necessary FDP receives the order to go finance ministry in order to have. Now, let's make a point. I have 2 questions. Leads us to another level, and the other one, the European level. Which strategies have been successful, and how did they change respect to the last elections? Well, the SPD had an election which was strongly concentrated on the people. The party was like disappeared behind the candidate. The candidate was the big power man in the front, and this was a strategic decision, and this is a decision that they decided very early. They didn't try to take somebody out of the hat at the very last minute. Last time with Gabriel and the other person. Here they decided on Scholz. They made the campaign for him, and then let him go with what he said. I'm the vice chancellor. I do know how to handle with these things, and the union is in front of the difficulty that there are different parties, or let's say there was always the strong part of the chancellor and the success she always had. Therefore, the party was quiet, and this has changed now because we have seen it does not work with Laschet. And about this we can talk a lot. Probably he lost the chancellorship in the right moment, when he was behind the president after the catastrophe of the floodings, and many of the citizens thought that he might not be a chancellor for a crisis. But he said he apologized for that. But obviously, I would like to ask something more about Laschet and CDU-CSU. We have a conservative green party. I was wrong. I thought that also in Germany we would have black-green. And to yesterday, I did not understand why Laschet, who wants to have a different approach, didn't talk immediately to the Greens. He didn't arrive to talk directly to Mrs. Baerbock. We can say, okay, the time is over. It's a new game. We want a coalition for the future. We want to go ahead, and I want to do it with the FDP and with the Greens. How can this be? I think he went far because he talked about modernization, a modernization coalition. He wanted with the two parties, and already this was very irritating for many in the newspapers, where he is compared to Gerhard Schröder 2005, when he didn't want to admit that he lost. And Mrs. Merkel said, "My party will not make you chancellor." And now, not admitting it, this is something that people now see also in Laschet, and therefore we are limited. Let's make a cut here. We could talk and talk and talk about the German solutions, but we can't speak here in Brussels without seeing what is on the table for Europe. Helene took two questions. The first one, and it's a good question: how will the power things change? Will Macron and Draghi be stronger? And if I can add to that, what should the European partners think? Should we think there will be something completely new? And Mrs. Merkel was famous for it. Will they be a reliable partner that is not going ahead too quickly? I guess that a coalition with Olaf Scholz would be strongly related to France and Italy. We already talked about it, about the Next Generation EU, and also in the Recovery Fund. The Social Democrats are agreed to hear what the southern countries say, and there were obviously also problems in the FDP, and we will see how this can be tackled with. Anyhow, Scholz with Draghi and Macron, he will work with them, and Macron told us that he, or showed that he received Scholz first. But he is the vice chancellor. But yes, maybe that this has been planned, but probably it's also because Scholz had his office. But the point is that for France it is very important in the economic and monetary part, where we have more difficulties. Is defense. Laschet went to Paris. They wanted a security union. This was a pleasure for Macron with the Greens and the SPD. Now, CDU-CSU was at the power in the last 16 years, and they didn't do a lot in order to improve the force, the FRAP of Germany. And we have seen this in Afghanistan latest. And in Germany, we have a strong transatlantic orientation on NATO, and in Germany they wouldn't say anything that would be against NATO, and therefore we need a European defense with the transatlantic pact. And I have to say, sometimes if you look at things from Brussels, Germany would like to be neutral like Austria and Switzerland, live in peace and make great money. But this is something that we will see and tackle within the next few months. The next question is always Lene Türk. It's very interesting. What does this mean for Mrs. von der Leyen if she doesn't had no direct connection to the Chancellor? And I would like to add, Ursula von der Leyen has seen that most of the European partners see it like this, progressive, I wouldn't say a left approach, but in the French style, in her program, Green Deal, Next Generation EU, and so on. The French people say it is investment policy. Now, this is a very interesting point. What can the Commission expect, and vice versa, and which role will Berlin have from Merkel? We do know that she had the cards all in her hand without giving of space for the other offices. That's very interesting. Mrs. von der Leyen has already brought in this case due to this progressive program that is also very near to what SPD and the Greens would like to have, and therefore as a program we do have really agreements and so-called street light coalition, but she does not have the direct connection to the Chancellor. How strongly this might influence, maybe she can have a good connection with Olaf Scholz. She knows him very well, and it might be. But the other way around, it might be even an advantage. The German coalition reminded football, a very good team, but too, well, not interested. They are not hungry anymore to fight for something. And this might be that we might also bring in new ideas we should be interested in. Yes, the big coalition had the coalition. They didn't have the right approach, and you should tackle with this result. And therefore, we had the coalition, and they never managed to have a vision for the future. She was like tackling the status quo, and very good success fighting against the crisis. And this was also the strong point of Mrs. Merkel to keep together. And now we do have something like a new start with all the digitalization question, the green transition, and the changes in foreign policy. We can't go on like this, and this is also a good sign. This is good for democracy. Things change, and we are in the very last minutes. Just one more question. Laschet, as has been shown, was a danger. Probably Mrs. Merkel should have prepared that better and earlier. Well, yes, I have to say yes, because it was prepared differently. They wanted Mrs. Karabauer, but she resigned because she had a quarrel with somebody in Thüringen. If she would have entered as a party leader during the COVID crisis, she might have been a good person for chancellor, but you can't obviously direct this all from the office of the chancellor. And afterwards, we are always cleverer. Well, the German, we are as well as the European situation. Philipp Saueracker from Cologne, and he says Mr. Laschet and Mr. Scholz will fight to build up coalition, and who of them is in your eyes the better person in order to get ahead and to reunite the union? Who is the better person in order to get us out of this crisis? Laschet, especially in the European policy, would have strong parts. He is a convinced European. He was in the European Parliament, and he has a good connection to France, and he is also very clever. He is finding a balance and compromises. This is his strong part. Now, with him in Europe, this would have been successful because he knows this balancing of interest. Scholz, I guess he will have a connection with Paris and Rome as long as Draghi is there, but obviously this will be negative for other partners because they like that Germany was not clearly in one spot on one side, and he is very convinced, and this election probably enhanced this feeling, because this is his victory, and probably he will be like this. Paris and Rome, in the meantime, from Mr. Blümel in Austria, we do have an alliance of the responsibles, 8 countries, and then Finland who entered, and now we have the Slovak Republic, and then there's an 8th country, I don't remember it. And they want to go back to a stricter stability policy as far as indebtedness is concerned. There are many of them are small countries in a traditional policy, and Germany that goes versus France, Spain, and Italy. Well, this is indeed a danger that we should be aware of. The European policy has not only been successful when they agreed with the French people, but especially also to represent the interests of the smaller European countries. This alliance of these people would be related to Mr. Lindner, and but if you talk about Scandinavia from the policy plan, we have less and less involvement. The Scandinavian countries are social democratic, and not only in migration, also in the household, they are quite strict. And this is something that Scholz has to consider. Now, very well, I think we could go ahead for a long time, but only to my last question, Mr. Steinmeier. Last time he intervened and put the big parties together, will he have an important role? Only if the meetings now are successful, therefore we will now have no traffic light and no Jamaica, and then he will go back to SPD and the union, because the parties need a majority, and there is also he will remember all when also talking Schulz. Thank you very much. We are at the end of our debate. And at the end, I would like to tell you which the next meeting will be. It will be the 12th of October. We will discuss on the Czech Republic has voted. For you, a nice afternoon, interesting days, just like we. You will continue to follow how things will go on, and see you very soon. Thank you very much.